The advice you built your career around, follow your passion, might be the exact reason you're still stuck. There is a lie at the center of the advice you've been given your entire life. And the terrifying part isn't that someone told it to you. The terrifying part is that you believed it so completely, you built your entire sense of self around it. You were told to follow your passion, and somewhere, quietly, you started to wonder why that wasn't working. Here is the question that will haunt everything that follows. What if passion isn't the beginning of great work, but the end of it? What if everything you've been told about finding meaning, finding purpose, finding a life that matters, is not just incomplete, but actively pointing you in the wrong direction? Sit with that for a moment. Don't dismiss it. Don't reach for the comfortable rebuttal. Because there is a man named Cal Newport who spent years studying people who loved what they did for a living. People who woke up genuinely engaged. People who had that rare, magnetic quality of someone who knows exactly why they exist professionally. He wanted to understand what they had. He wanted to map the interior landscape of a meaningful career. And what he found was not what anyone expected. It wasn't passion that got them there. It was something far less romantic, far more demanding, and ultimately, far more powerful. Something that lives not in the feeling of inspiration, but in the architecture of mastery. This is the story of what that something is. And it begins not with motivation, but with a question about your hands. Think about someone who is extraordinary at what they do. Not someone famous necessarily, someone you've encountered. A craftsman, a teacher, a programmer who moves through problems like water finding its level. A musician who plays with such ease it looks like conversation. Whatever field they inhabit, you recognize something when you're near them. A kind of presence, a density of competence that you can almost feel in the room. Now ask yourself, did they get there by feeling passionate about it? Or did passion come later, much later, after years of building something real? The distinction sounds small. It isn't. It's the difference between a life that opens and a life that circles in place. Cal Newport opens his exploration with a story that most people would read as inspiring. A man named Thomas, a Zen monk, living simply on a mountain, meditating, tending gardens, moving through his days with quiet purpose. People would ask Thomas how he found such peace, such meaning. His answer always sounded like wisdom. Follow your passion. Listen to your heart. Do what calls to you. Newport doesn't argue against Thomas's contentment. He argues against the advice. Because for every Thomas, for every person who wandered toward their authentic calling and arrived safely, there are thousands of people who took that same advice and found themselves more lost than when they started. People who quit stable jobs to pursue dreams, only to discover that the dream, when treated as a career, became work like any other work. People who kept waiting for the lightning bolt of passion to show them the way, growing anxious and paralyzed while the years moved forward without them. The follow your passion hypothesis, Newport argues, contains a hidden assumption so deeply embedded we've stopped seeing it. The assumption is this, that somewhere inside you, a pre-existing passion waits to be discovered, and your job is to find it, align your career to it, and then fulfillment will follow. But when researchers actually began studying how people develop passions, not what people say about passion, but how it actually forms, the picture that emerged was deeply inconvenient for that story. Psychologist Robert Vallerand spent years studying the psychology of passion. What he found was that most people's strongest passions were connected to activities they had been doing for a long time, not activities they had discovered at the moment of some profound inner revelation. Activities they had practiced. Activities where skill had accumulated over time, slowly changing the texture of the experience from frustrating to fluent, from uncomfortable to engaging, from tolerable to, eventually, absorbing. The passion didn't precede the mastery preceded the passion. Newport frames this through something he calls the craftsman mindset, and the contrast he draws is precise. There are two ways to approach your work. In the passion mindset, you ask, what does this work give me? Does it match my calling? Does it provide meaning? Does it feel right? The focus is inward, self-referential. The question is always some version of, am I getting what I deserve? In the craftsman mindset, the question is different, almost opposite. Instead of asking what the work gives you, you ask what you can give the work. You focus not on how the work makes you feel, but on how good you can become at it. You orient yourself not toward discovery, but toward development. This sounds like the kind of advice that might be printed on motivational calendars. But Newport is not offering you a motivational reframe. He's offering you a fundamental reorientation, one with real structural consequences for how careers actually unfold. Because here is what happens when you adopt the craftsman mindset seriously. You begin to accumulate something that almost no one talks about, but everyone who has a genuinely great career possesses. Newport calls it career capital. Career capital is simple to define and surprisingly hard to build. It is the rare and valuable skills you possess. Rare because most people in your field don't have them. Valuable because the actual market, not the market you wish existed, will pay real things for them. Autonomy, interesting projects, creative control, compensation, respect. The logic is ruthlessly straightforward. If you want a rare and valuable career, you need rare and valuable skills to trade for it. You can't get something remarkable with something ordinary. You can't purchase creative control with merely adequate technical ability. You can't buy the life you want with the skills you have if those skills are widely available. Newport uses the metaphor of a marketplace, and it's worth dwelling on. In any marketplace, you can only get something if you have something to offer in exchange. The great careers, the ones with autonomy, meaning, engagement, the ones that feel like they fit, those are rare things. Rare things require rare currency to acquire. Most people, without realizing it, are trying to purchase those rare careers with ordinary currency. They are offering average competence and wondering why no one is offering them an extraordinary life in return. The craftsman mindset is the systematic, disciplined practice of acquiring rare currency. But here's where Newport's thinking gets genuinely uncomfortable, because he doesn't just tell you to work harder. He makes a sharper distinction. He says there are two types of work that look similar from the outside, but have almost nothing in common in their effects. He calls them, borrowing from cognitive psychology, shallow work and deep work. But in this context, what matters is a related idea: the difference between just accumulating hours and actually accumulating skill. There is a specific mechanism by which expertise is developed. It has a name: deliberate practice. And it is the single most important concept in understanding why some people get dramatically better over time and others plateau. Deliberate practice is not the same as experience. This distinction will unsettle you if you follow it carefully. Most people, when they become reasonably competent at something, stop doing the thing that made them competent. They stop operating at the edge of their ability. They stop working in the uncomfortable zone where failure is frequent and progress is visible. They move instead into what psychologist Erickson called autonomous performance, a smooth, efficient, practiced expression of their existing skill level. It feels like mastery. It functions like stagnation. Deliberate practice is the deliberate refusal to stay in that comfortable zone. It is the systematic practice of working just beyond what you can currently do. It requires feedback. It requires attention. It requires the willingness to fail, repeatedly, in small contained ways that force you to improve. Newport observes that most knowledge workers never apply anything resembling deliberate practice to their careers. They work. They gain experience. They become, over time, competent. But they do not stretch. They do not engage in the uncomfortable, effortful process of pushing their skill threshold forward. And so their career capital accumulates slowly or not at all. The musicians, the programmers, the writers, the surgeons, the executives who reach genuinely rare levels of competence, they practice differently. Not harder necessarily, but differently. With the systematic intensity of someone who understands that the quality of their practice, not just the quantity of their experience, is what separates ordinary from extraordinary. Newport tells the story of a guitarist named Jordan Tice, a musician who plays with almost unsettling fluency. What Tice describes about his practice regimen is not romantic. It is not inspired. It is methodical to the point of seeming clinical. He isolates phrases that don't feel right. He slows them down. He runs them through different contexts. He builds what feels broken until it isn't broken anymore. Then he finds the next thing that's broken. That is not a story about passion. That is a story about craft. And the passion, the genuine, sustaining, life-affirming engagement that makes Tice extraordinary to watch, came out of that craft, not before it. Now we arrive at something Newport argues with a force that deserves to be felt. He says that the traits that define great work, creativity, impact, control, engagement, are not things that get handed to you because you found the right job title. They are traits you must earn. They must be purchased with career capital. And if you try to acquire them before you have sufficient capital to trade for them, something predictable happens. You end up in what Newport calls the control traps. This is where the story gets sharp. Career control, the ability to decide what you work on, when you work on it, who you work with, how you work, is one of the most powerful predictors of work satisfaction ever measured. Psychologists have confirmed this across dozens of studies. People with high autonomy over their work are measurably more satisfied, more engaged, more creative, and more likely to describe their work as meaningful. So control is real. Control matters enormously. But Newport identifies two traps that destroy people on the path to acquiring it. The first trap: pursuing control before you have enough career capital to support it. This is the most seductive mistake, and it follows almost automatically from passion-first thinking. You're told your passion is enough. You believe your authentic desire for a certain kind of life entitles you to it. So you make a dramatic leap. You quit, you pivot, you announce a new direction. Before you have built the underlying competence that would make that direction sustainable. The result is predictable. You fail. Not because your dream was wrong, because you tried to cash a check your skill set couldn't cover. The second trap is more subtle and more insidious. You do build the career capital. You do become genuinely excellent at something. And then, when you begin trying to translate that excellence into control, the people who benefit from your current arrangement, employers, organizations, structures, will resist. Newport calls this the courage culture, the idea that all you need to do to gain freedom is have the courage to ask for it, to demand it, to simply claim it. He's deeply suspicious of this framing, not because courage is irrelevant, but because courage without capital is just romantic self-destruction. What actually protects you when you make a bid for control, when you push back against an organization, when you demand more autonomy, when you walk away from a comfortable constraint, is not your bravery. It's your alternatives. It's the fact that you have real, demonstrable, rare skills that other people would genuinely want. Without that, courage is just exposure. Newport offers a specific test for navigating control decisions. He calls it the law of financial viability. It sounds blunt because it is. Before you make a move toward more control, ask, is there evidence that the thing I'm moving toward will support me financially? Not eventually, now or soon. Does someone, somewhere, already pay for what you're trying to do? This isn't about selling out. It's about signal. Financial viability is the clearest available evidence that you've built something genuinely rare and valuable. That the market, not just your enthusiasm, affirms what you're offering. In the absence of that signal, what you may be following is not your passion, but your comfort, your preference for novelty, your desire to escape a difficulty rather than to build through it. Pause here, because this is the point in Newport's argument where people often feel a kind of deflation, a slowness, as if the air has left the room. Because if this is true, if career capital must precede the meaningful career, if passion is earned rather than discovered, if control requires proof before it can be claimed, then what does that mean for where you are right now? What does it mean for the gap you've been feeling between where you are and where you believe you should be? Here is the question you may not have let yourself sit with before. What rare and valuable skill are you building right now? Not what are you interested in, not what do you feel called toward. What are you actually getting uncomfortably better at, methodically, with the discipline of someone who understands that excellence is not a side effect of enthusiasm? If the answer comes slowly, or doesn't come at all, that may be the most important thing you've discovered in a long time. But Newport doesn't leave you in that discomfort. He takes you somewhere further. Because even career capital, even mastery, even the deliberate accumulation of rare skill, none of it tells you what to aim at. You can become excellent in a vacuum. You can build rare skills in directions that never cohere into anything that feels like a life. Which is why, after career capital, Newport turns to what he calls mission. Mission is not purpose in the motivational poster sense. It's not a statement you write on a vision board. Newport uses it precisely. A mission is a unifying direction that organizes your work, that gives your accumulated expertise an overarching aim worth pursuing. The kind of work that ripples outward, work that changes something. And here, Newport does something that I find genuinely beautiful in its honesty. He doesn't tell you to discover your mission by looking inward, he tells you to look forward. He introduces the idea of the adjacent possible, a concept borrowed from complexity theorist Stuart Kauffman and applied with precision. At any given moment in any given field, there is a set of possibilities that exists just beyond the current frontier of what is known and practiced. Those possibilities are not visible from a distance. They are not visible from the outside. They are only visible to people who are already operating at the leading edge of their domain. This is a crucial insight about how breakthroughs actually happen. The great missions, the ones that produce genuinely innovative, meaningful work, do not come from people who stood at a distance from a field and imagined what might be. They come from people who went deep, who became genuinely expert, who inhabited the frontier long enough that the adjacent possible revealed itself, who could see, from the inside, what the field was almost ready for, what gap waited to be filled, what synthesis no one had quite made yet. You cannot think your way to a meaningful mission. You can only practice your way there. Newport illustrates this with a series of examples, but the one I want to stay with is a researcher named Kirk French who studies ancient Mayan civilization. What French eventually built, a television series, genuine public outreach, a mission that extended far beyond academic publication, was not something he discovered by asking himself what he was passionate about. It was something that became visible to him after years of deep expertise, after becoming one of the people who actually understood the material at a level where the gaps were apparent. The mission was not waiting to be found. The mission was constructed, built from the intersection of deep knowledge and genuine curiosity about what hadn't been done yet. Here, Newport adds what is perhaps his most practically useful concept, the idea of little bets. He borrows this framing from entrepreneur Peter Sims, and it refers to a specific strategy for pursuing a mission without betting your entire career on it before you know if it will work. A little bet is a small, concrete project, deliverable, measurable, time-limited, that allows you to test whether a specific direction is viable. Not a grand launch, not a total identity pivot, a probe, an experiment with stakes small enough to survive failure, but real enough to generate genuine feedback. Newport traces how comedian Chris Rock, genuinely one of the most acclaimed comedians alive, develops material. He doesn't write a perfect special and then perform it. He performs constantly in small clubs, in uncontrolled settings, trying material that mostly fails, refining jokes through hundreds of small bets, learning which ideas resonate and which don't, building towards something larger through the accumulation of many small experiments. The path to a meaningful mission, Newport argues, is not dramatic. It is iterative. It is the patient, systematic exploration of the adjacent possible through a series of small, purposeful experiments, each one generating information about what works, what connects, what matters to real people in ways that can be built upon. This brings Newport to his final, and in some ways most profound, concept. He calls it the law of remarkability, and it is both simple and demanding. Not all missions are equal. Not all good work is remarkable. Newport makes a specific claim. For a mission to gain traction, for it to spread, to reach the people it's meant to reach, to actually build the life and career it has the potential to build, it must be remarkable in a very specific sense. Remarkable doesn't just mean good. It means remarkable in the literal sense, worthy of remark, worthy of being mentioned, worthy of the kind of response that causes one person to tell another person, almost involuntarily, because not telling them would feel like withholding something. Newport adds a second condition. For work to spread, it must launch in a venue that makes spreading possible. He calls these remarkability venues, the places and communities and networks where the kind of work you're doing gets shared among the kind of people who care about it. The most remarkable work in the wrong venue spreads nowhere. The most genuinely interesting mission dies in a context where no one has the language or the appetite to receive it. These ideas close into each other. The mission finds its expression through little bets. The little bets look for work that is remarkable. The remarkable work launches in venues where it can spread. And the whole process is only possible for someone who has built sufficient career capital to see the adjacent possible clearly enough to generate genuine ideas worth pursuing. The structure is not circular. It is cumulative. Each layer rests on the one below it. Career capital is the foundation. Control is the leverage career capital earns. Mission is the direction that gives control its meaning. Remarkability is the quality that lets mission create real impact in the world. Newport's full argument, assembled, looks like this. Stop asking what the world owes you. Start building something the world will need. Not because passion demands it, but because excellence earns it. Not because inspiration arrived, but because deliberate practice compounded over time into something rare. This is the structure of the life that doesn't just feel purposeful, but actually is. And yet, there is one last thing worth sitting with. Because for all the precision of Newport's framework, for all its intellectual rigor and its practical clarity, it rests on a demand that is easy to state and difficult to sustain. It demands patience. Not the passive patience of waiting, the active patience of someone who is committed to a direction and does not require immediate confirmation that the direction is right. The patience of a craftsman who understands that the feedback loop between effort and mastery is long, sometimes years long, and who does not interpret the absence of immediate reward as evidence of failure. This is, perhaps, the deepest reason that follow your passion became such compelling advice. Not because it's true, but because it promises something rare and precious: the shortcut. The feeling that there is a direct route from longing to fulfillment, from desire to destination, from the self you are to the self you could be, and that the only thing standing between you and that route is the courage to step onto it. Newport's answer is not as romantic, but it is more honest, and in the end, it is more humane. Because the person who builds rare skills over time, who practices at the edge of their ability, who accumulates career capital through deliberate effort, who trades that capital for real control, who explores the adjacent possible through careful experiments, who builds toward a mission that is genuinely remarkable, that person does not spend their working life waiting for passion to arrive. That person becomes someone passion can find. Think of it this way. The question, "What is my passion?" sends you looking inward, into territory that is ultimately unknowable, into feelings that shift with mood and context and circumstance. It sends you searching for something that may not yet exist, in a place where searching cannot produce it. The question, "What am I building?" sends you outward, into the actual world, into contact with real work, real feedback, real consequences. It asks not what you feel, but what you do. Not what you imagine, but what you construct. And over time, slowly, undramatically, without the fanfare of epiphany, something remarkable tends to happen to people who commit to the second question. They stop looking for work to love. They find themselves looking back at work they already love. Work that feels, from the inside, like it was always theirs. Work that feels like passion, not because they discovered it, because they built it, carefully, over years, one skilled act at a time, until it became impossible to imagine that the work and the person were ever separate things. This is what Newport means by his title. Not a boast, not an aspiration, a description of what happens when someone becomes so genuinely, demonstrably good at something valuable that the world simply cannot afford not to pay attention. So good they can't ignore you. Not because you insisted loudly on your right to be heard, not because you found your voice, or claimed your space, or followed the path that felt most authentic, but because you built something that exists. Something that stands in the world independent of your feelings about it. Something that works. The life you imagined, with its creative freedom, its sense of meaning, its feeling of having genuinely contributed something worth contributing, that life is not found. It is earned. It is constructed, slowly, from the raw material of your focused effort and your stubborn refusal to remain ordinary at the thing you have chosen to do. And the lie you were told at the beginning, "Follow your passion and the rest will follow," dissolves not because someone proved it wrong, but because you eventually become good enough that you stop needing to ask whether the passion is there. You already know,